All right, so the unit that we are starting is a unit on cellular transport. The important thing for us to focus on is exactly what cellular transport is. And when we talk about cellular transport, we're not talking about actual cell movement. Right? We're not talking about the locomotion of cells and how they get from one place to another. What we're actually talking about is how different substances are transported within a cell across the cell membrane. So specifically, we're focusing on cellular transport across the cell membrane. We want to see how it is when different substances that we consume are going to get into the cell, or when different substances that your cells make are going to get out of the cell. So, for example, talking about how the things that you eat or how the water that you drink gets into a cell. If you think about it, you're going to eat food. First thing you do is you chew it up, you swallow it, it ends up in your stomach. Your stomach starts to digest it, it kind of turns to mush. That mush is going to move on to the small intestines. The small intestine's job is to absorb out those nutrients. When we say nutrients, though, that's a really vague term. We learned a more specific term when we're talking about nutrients. We talked about carbohydrates. We talked about proteins. We talked about lipids. Those were 3 types of the 4 organic compounds, right? The only one that we're missing there is nucleic acids. So when we say the small intestines absorbs nutrients, we're talking about the small intestines absorbing out carbs, lipids, proteins, the different things that your body needs, your cells need. Where does the small intestines absorb those nutrients to? The bloodstream. So ultimately, you're going to have these carbs, lipids, proteins, they're all going to be in your bloodstream. Where's the bloodstream going to take them? Everywhere. It's going to take them to all the different cells all over your entire body. Now, that mush that's left behind in the small intestines is going to move on to the large intestines. The large intestine's job is going to be to absorb out water. Make sure that it holds any water in your body that it possibly can. You don't want to get rid of water that your body can use. So you pull out the water from that waste mush. Right? Now you have water that's been absorbed into the bloodstream. So you've got carbs surfing the bloodstream, water surfing the bloodstream, lipids, proteins. You've got all these different molecules surfing the bloodstream, and now what's left behind is waste that you can get rid of and dispose of. In addition to those things that you consume, there's also another really important molecule that we need, oxygen. So we breathe oxygen in, it comes into our lungs. From our lungs, where does it go? There's no other way out of the lungs, right? There's only one way in, one way out, right? Back out through your mouth and through your nose. So then what happens to the oxygen? The oxygen actually has the ability to pass right through the walls of the lungs, like a ghost passes through the walls, right into the bloodstream as well. So now we've got oxygen in the bloodstream too. That oxygen is going to be carried to all those cells. Now you've got oxygen and water and carbs and lipids and proteins and all these different things sitting at the cells waiting to get into the cells so that they can actually be used. How are they going to get in? All right? Likewise, there's stuff that needs to get out, right? Your ribosomes, that organelle, that specific organelle inside of your cell that makes proteins, when those ribosomes make proteins, how do the proteins get from inside the cell outside the cell if they're needed somewhere else? All right? How do your cells get rid of waste? When your cell makes carbon dioxide, right? How does it get rid of it? How does it get back to your lungs so that you can breathe it out, since carbon dioxide is one of our wastes? How do our waste products and other things exit the cell? Right? This whole entire process is called cell transport. But our first barrier that we encounter is the cell membrane, right? Another name, sorry guys, got trigger happy. Another name for the cell membrane, all right, that we talked about, we said that the cell membrane was also called the phospholipid bilayer. Remembering that? Ringing a bell? I drew you a picture, right? Little phospholipids 2 layers, phosphate heads, fatty acid tails, right? Phospholipid bilayer. We also said that the cell membrane was semi-permeable. What does that mean? Semi. Sort of, kind of. All right, permeable. To permeate, to pass through. So, semi-permeable, it's sort of able to be passed through. The cell membrane, some things are allowed to get in, some things are not, right? It has selectivity. It's selective about what goes in, what goes out, right? And I actually talked to you guys about what a particular nickname that I like to use for the cell membrane is. In the past, I've actually told you guys that the cell membrane is like the bouncer, right? It regulates, right? It controls what enters, what leaves the cell. It says, yeah, you're all right, come on in. No, sorry, we don't want any of you here, get lost. All right, it's going to actually control what's coming in and what's going out of the cell. So, if the cell membrane is a bouncer, then I like to think of these 3 molecules right here, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water, as the club VIP, all right? The club cell, right? These are the VIP. They get to come and go however they please. The bouncer can't control them. The bouncer can't say, no, you can't come in, no, you can't leave. They're so important that they can just pass right on by the bouncer. The bouncer can't do anything about them. So just like we said, cell membrane, phospholipid bilayer, right? Inside of the cell, all right, tends to be lots and lots of water, right? This is the inside of our cell. This is the outside of our cell. We should know, like, majority of our body is made up of water. So outside of our cell, we've got plenty of water. And inside of our cell, we've got plenty of water. And we have these phosphate heads on our cell membrane that have no problem being in contact with the water. We refer to them as being hydrophilic or water-loving. They like to be in contact with the water. However, these fatty acid tails, this middle portion that we have, we refer to them as being hydrophobic, water-fearing. They don't want any water in that middle region, right? So this middle section, all in here, is dry. There's no water in that space. In fact, if water tries to move through, it gets pushed right to the other side, all right, in a real rush. Remember those fatty acid tails? Fatty acids, they're a type of lipid. Lipids repel water. Phospholipid bilayer, all right? That part of the phospholipid repels water, pushes it away. So it's going to actually push that water straight on through. Now, if the cell membrane is the bouncer, and oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water are VIPs, then this guy right here is the back door. The proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane are a back door. When a molecule gets rejected by the bouncer, when the cell membrane says, nope, sorry, can't come through, there's always another way in. Go around to the back door. See if you can get through the back door. See if you can make it in that way, right? That back door is another way to get inside of the cell. So again, just reiterating the fact that the fatty acid tails are going to repel the water, and the phosphate head is going to be attracted to the water, and these are phospholipids that make up the cell membrane.